The summit and the moment when everything would change forever. Neither of them slept that night. But neither of them faced Asterisk. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Crystal Palace had been built 1,000 years ago to hold the most important gatherings in Silurian history. And today, it lived up to its purpose as leaders from every major power in the galaxy took their seats beneath the vaulted crystal ceiling. Emperor Selvar sat upon his throne at the head of the chamber, flanked by advisors and guards, his ancient face betraying none of the weariness that had settled into his bones. Princess Alethvara stood in her designated position beside the throne, the ceremonial robes concealing the rapid beating of her heart and the small communication device hidden in her palm. Across the hall, Commander Marcus Cole stood with the human delegation, his dress uniform immaculate and his posture perfect despite the weight of what was about to happen. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded chamber, and in that glance past everything they could not say aloud, the summit began with the usual formalities. Speeches about unity and cooperation and the bright future that awaited a galaxy. Finally, Pisha Lithvara listened, with half her attention while the rest tracked the movements of Lord Vashar and his co-conspirators, noting how they had positioned themselves around the chamber like pieces on a game board. The assassin Muriel was harder to spot, a serving woman moving among the delegations with trays of refreshments, her eyes empty and her movements mechanical in ways that only someone looking for it would notice. The moment was approaching. Elithvara could feel it in the air, like the charge before a lightning storm. Emperor Selvar rose to deliver the keynote address, praising the heroes of the war and calling for continued cooperation between species. And as he spoke, Muriel drifted closer to the human delegation. Alethvara's finger hovered over the communication device. Marcus stepped forward to accept the Emperor's formal thanks, moving to a podium where he would address the assembled leaders. And Muriel's hand reached beneath her serving tray. Now, Elithvara whispered into her device. Everything happened at once. Hidden security personnel emerged from concealed positions around the chamber, their weapons trained on the conspirators, who had expected no resistance. Murray pulled a weapon from beneath her tray, but Marcus was already moving, his prosthetic arm knocking the device away with inhuman speed, while his other hand caught her wrist in a liaise. Restraining grip guards in the Emperor's colors surrounded Lord Vashar and his allies before they could react, and the entire chamber erupted in chaos as dignitaries shouted questions and demands. What is the meaning of this? Vashar bellowed, his face flushed with rage and fear. This is an outrage. I demand an explanation. Princess Alethvara stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the crystal amplifiers that transmitted every word to 1 trillion watching worlds. The meaning is justice. Lord Vashar, you and your fellow conspirators have been caught in the act of attempting to assassinate Commander Cole and blame the attack on human extremists. Lies and slander. I will have your position for this. Then perhaps you can explain why your personal communications contain detailed plans for today's attack. Plans that match exactly what just occurred. The evidence appeared on holographic displays throughout the chamber. Intercepted messages and financial records and testimony from turned conspirators. A mountain of proof that could not be denied or explained away. Admiral Kreeth tried to flee but found the exits blocked by human marines who had infiltrated the palace guard counselor. Thornava collapsed into her seat. All pretense of innocence abandoned. Marcus released Muriel into the veil into the hands of medical personnel who sedated her gently and began the long process of undoing the damage to her mind. The conspiracy against humanity ends here, he said, his voice steady as he addressed the assembled leaders. Not through violence or vengeance, but through truth. We could have struck first. We could have used the same underhanded tactics that were used against us. But that's not who humans are. He turned to face the cameras that broadcast his words across the galaxy. We came to the stars, hoping to find friends and allies. And instead we found a war that nearly destroyed us all. We fought and bled and died alongside species who once dismissed us as insignificant. And together we won. His green eyes swept the chamber, meeting the gazes of beings from 100 worlds. The conspirators wanted to keep humanity divided and dependent, to make us servants instead of partners. But they failed because they underestimated what makes us who we are. We don't give up. We don't abandon our friends. And we don't let fear dictate our future. The chamber was silent, every being present hanging on his words. Peace doesn't mean the end of struggle. It means the struggle changes. We will face new challenges and new enemies and new tests of our resolve. But we will face them together, not as masters and servants, but as equals. Not as separate species competing for scraps, but as one galactic community building something better. He extended his hand toward Elithvara, and she stepped forward to take it. Princess Elithvara risked everything to help expose this conspiracy. A Silurian noble working with a human commander to protect the future of both our peoples. This is what the galaxy can be if we choose it. Emperor Selvar rose from his throne, his ancient eyes bright with something that might have been pride. My daughter has shown the courage that the Silurian throne has always demanded of its heirs. The conspirators will face justice, and let this day stand as proof that the bonds between our peoples cannot be broken by cowards hiding in shadows. The applause began slowly, but built into a thundering wave that shook the crystal walls in the days that followed. The galaxy transformed. The conspirators faced trials broadcast across every inhabited world. Their crimes, laid bare for all to see, treaties were rewritten to recognize humanity's contributions and grant their colonies full membership in the coalition. Veterans of the war found new purpose in building rather than destroying. And the children born in peacetime grew up knowing that humans were heroes, not primitives. Marcus stayed on Siluria for 6 months, working with local authorities and coalition officials to establish frameworks for cooperation that would outlast any individual. Every night, he and Elithvara walked in the Crystal Gardens, their conversations ranging from galactic politics to childhood memories to dreams of futures neither had dared imagine during the long years of war. On the last night before his departure for Earth, they stood beside the singing pool where they had shared their first real conversation as adults. "I have to go," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "My people need me, but I will come back. I know you will. You always keep your promises." He reached into his pocket and pulled out one final carving. The most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was a sparrow and a starflower intertwined, carved from crystal and wood merged together by some technique she could not identify. Two different materials becoming something stronger for their joining. "I had help with this one," he admitted. "A Silurian artisan who understood what I was trying to create." Elithvara took the carving and felt tears sliding down her cheeks for what seemed like the 100th time since his return. "What does it mean?" "It means that humans and Silurians are different. We always will be, but different doesn't mean separate. It means we can complement each other, strengthen each other, build something together that neither could build alone." "That sounds like a proposal." Marcus laughed, the sound clear and genuine and free of the shadows that had haunted him for so long. "It's a promise. The same as always, I will find my way back to you because that's what humans do. We hold on to what matters and we never let go." "And what about Silurians?" "What about them?" Elithvara smiled, a smile that was part mischief and part challenge and entirely her own. "We have our own saying, you know, about stubbornness." "I didn't know that." "We say that the crystal trees sing because they refuse to be silent, that the moons rise because they refuse to be forgotten, and that love endures because it refuses to be diminished." She stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I refuse to be diminished by your absence. Marcus Cole, I will wait and I will work and I will build the future we both dreamed of. And when you return, I will be here. That sounds like a promise. It is. He kissed her then, under the light of the 3 moons and the singing of the crystal trees. A kiss that sealed their pledge and launched a new chapter in the history of 2 species. When his ship departed the next morning, Elithvera watched from the highest balcony of the Crystal Palace. The intertwined carving clutched against her heart. She did not cry because there was nothing to mourn. The war was over. The conspiracy was broken. And somewhere among the stars, a stubborn human was already plotting his return. Galaxy had learned many lessons from the conflict that had nearly destroyed it. Lessons about courage and sacrifice and the unexpected strength found in unlikely places. But the greatest lesson, Elithvera thought as the ship vanished into the endless dark, was the simplest one: hope could survive anything if you refused to let it go, and humans, as Marcus had proven time and again, were very good at refusing. The future stretched before her, uncertain and challenging and full of possibilities. She smiled and turned back to face it. There was work to be done and a galaxy to rebuild. And somewhere among the stars, an unyielding, the massive starship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a silver moon falling from the sky. And every human who saw it felt their hearts stop for just a moment. Queen Valithra of the Cirrus Dominion stood at the observation deck of her flagship, the throne of eternity, and watched the blue planet grow larger beneath her feet. She had traveled across 12 star systems to reach this small world at the edge of the galaxy, and she wondered if the journey had been a terrible mistake. Her scales shimmered with deep purple and gold as she turned to face her chief advisor, a tall reptilian creature named Kethrol, who had served her family for 300 years. "This is the planet the prophecy speaks of?" Kethrol asked, his voice filled with doubt that he did not try to hide. "The ancient text so clear," Valithra replied, her amber eyes still fixed on the world below. "A species untouched by galactic influence, whose dormant fire can burn away the darkness. The humans match every description." Kethrol made a sound of disgust deep in his throat. "My queen, our scouts have studied these creatures for months. They are weak, fragile, and short-lived. Their bodies break easily, and their technology is primitive. They cannot even travel beyond their own star system with any real speed. And yet the Void Collective fears something in this region of space," the Queen said quietly. "They have avoided this sector for 10,000 years. Why would ancient darkness fear primitive creatures unless those creatures held some hidden power?" The advisor had no answer for that question, and so he remained silent as the ship began its final approach. The humans reacted exactly as Valithra expected when she made contact with their leaders. There was fear at first, then wonder, and finally a desperate hope that these visitors from the stars might share their advanced technology. The Queen found their eagerness somewhat sad, but also strangely charming. She met with presidents and generals and scientists in a great hall that the humans had prepared for her arrival. They offered her gifts and promises of friendship, and they asked many questions about the universe beyond their small world. But Valithra had not come for friendship or diplomacy. She had come because her empire was dying. "The Void Collective has awakened," she told the assembled human leaders, her translator device converting her words into their language. "They are an enemy older than most stars. Creatures of living darkness that consume entire civilizations. My people have fought them before, but we have never faced an assault like this. They have already destroyed 4 of my worlds and killed billions of my subjects." The humans listened with growing horror on their faces as she described the enemy. She told them of shadow ships that appeared without warning, of harbingers that fed on fear and despair, of worlds left as empty husks floating dead in space. "We have weapons," one of the human generals said. A man with gray hair and hard eyes, We can help you fight. Valithra shook her head slowly. Your weapons would be useless against the void. They exist partly in dimensions your science does not yet understand. What I need is not your military might. Then, what do you want from us? The general asked. A champion, the queen said simply. The prophecy speaks of a single warrior from your world who carries within them a power that can turn the tide of this war. I have come to find that warrior and take them back to my empire. The room erupted in confused voices, but Valithra raised one clawed hand and silence fell immediately. The humans were learning quickly, but she was not someone to interrupt. I will interview candidates myself. She continued, Send me your greatest soldiers, your most skilled fighters, your bravest warriors. I will know the one I seek when I see them. Over the next 3 weeks, Valithra met with hundreds of human warriors. They sent her special forces operators, martial arts masters, elite soldiers from every nation on Earth. She examined each one with both her eyes and her psychic senses. Searching for the spark that the prophecy described, she found nothing but disappointment. They are impressive for their species, Cathrall admitted one evening as they reviewed the day's candidates. That woman from the eastern nation could move faster than I expected. And the large man from the northern continent had surprising strength. But none of them have what I seek, Valithra said with frustration in her voice. I can sense something in all of them. A tiny flicker of potential, but it is not enough. The prophecy spoke of a dormant fire, not a dying ember. Perhaps the prophecy was wrong. My queen, Valithra did not respond because she could not accept that possibility. If the prophecy was wrong, then her empire had no hope. The Void Collective would consume everything she had spent her life building, and the Cirith people would join the countless other civilizations that had been erased from existence on the morning of the 22nd day. A human officer brought her a file on a candidate who had not been on the original list. This man was not selected by our committee, the officer explained nervously. But he heard about your search and demanded to be considered. He is quite persistent. Valithra looked at the file and frowned. The candidate was named Marcus Cole, and his record was unremarkable by human standards. He was 53 years old, which she understood was past the prime fighting age for humans. He had served in his nation's military for 30 years and had earned several honors for bravery, but he had also been wounded many times. The medical reports showed a body covered in scars and old injuries. He is old and damaged, Cathrall observed, looking over her shoulder at the file. Why would we waste time on such a broken specimen? Bring him to me, Valithra said, and something in her voice made the human officer run to obey. Marcus Cole walked into the interview chamber with a slight limp that he tried to hide. He was tall for a human, but not unusually so, with gray hair cut short and a face that had clearly seen much hardship. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and when he looked at Valithra, he did not bow or look away. The queen felt something stir in her chest, a sensation she did not immediately recognize. You are old, she said bluntly. Your body is damaged, your youth is gone, and you have no special abilities that make you stand out from other humans. Why do you believe you should be my champion? Marcus Cole smiled slightly, and it was not a nervous smile or a hopeful smile. It was the smile of someone who had stopped caring what others thought of him long ago, because everyone else you have talked to wants glory, he said. They want to be heroes, to have stories told about them, to return home covered in honor. I do not want any of those things. Then what do you want? Valithra asked. I want to make sure that whatever war you are fighting stays far away from Earth. Marcus replied. I have a daughter here and grandchildren. If going with you means they stay safe, then I will go. I do not care if I die out there among your stars. I only care that the people I love never have to face the darkness you described. Valithra stared at him for a long moment, and in that moment she reached out with her psychic senses and touched the edges of his mind. What she found there made her ancient heart beat faster. There was no fire visible on the surface, nothing that would impress a casual observer. But deep down, buried beneath decades of pain and loss and sacrifice, she felt something vast and terrible sleeping. It was like standing at the edge of a volcano and feeling the heat from far below. "You are afraid," she said softly. "Of course I am afraid," Marcus answered. "Only fools feel no fear. But I learned a long time ago that fear does not matter. What matters is what you do when you are afraid." Valithra rose from her throne and walked down the steps to stand before this aging human warrior. He did not step back, did not flinch, did not show any sign of submission. He simply looked at her with those storm-colored eyes and waited. "You are the one." She said. Kithral made a sound of protest, but the queen silenced him with a look. "This broken old creature cannot possibly be." "He is the one," Valithra repeated, and her voice held a certainty that ended all argument. "Prepare a chamber for him on the ship. We leave for Sirith space within the hour." As Marcus Cole was led away to gather his few belongings, Kethral approached his queen with confusion written across his scaled features. "I do not understand, my queen. He seems so ordinary." Valithra watched the human disappear through the doorway, and she felt the memory of that sleeping fire still burning in her mind. "He is not ordinary," she said quietly. "He is exactly what the prophecy promised. And when the time comes, I believe he will show us what humans truly are." She only hoped that when that moment arrived, the galaxy would be ready for what it would see. The training chamber aboard the Throne of Eternity was a massive circular room with walls made of some metal that Marcus Cole did not recognize, and the floor was covered with sand that shifted and moved in strange patterns as if it were a live Marcus stood in the center of that chamber wearing the simple training clothes the Sirith had provided. And he looked up at the 7 Kethvari warriors who surrounded him with expressions of barely hidden contempt on their reptilian faces. The Kethvari were the elite guard of Queen Valithra, soldiers who had been bred for combat across 1,000 generations. Each one stood over 7 feet tall with scales that could deflect blade strikes and muscles that could crush starship hull plating. Their eyes were cold and yellow, and their claws looked sharp enough to tear through stone. "Begin," said the training master. A scarred veteran named Drethkol, who had killed more enemies than Marcus had met people in his entire life. The first warrior came at Marcus with a speed that his human eyes could barely follow. One moment the Kethvari was standing still, and the next moment Marcus was on his back with a taste of blood in his mouth and a ringing in his ears. He did not remember being hit. Pathetic. Drethkal announced to the watching soldiers, "The human cannot even see our attacks. How can he hope to fight beside us?" Marcus pushed himself to his feet and wiped the blood from his lip. His ribs ached where the blow had landed, and he suspected at least one of them was cracked. "Again," he said. The Kethvari laughed, a harsh hissing sound that filled the chamber. They found his determination amusing rather than admirable. The second attack came faster than the first, and this time Marcus tried to dodge. He failed completely and found himself on the ground once more, this time with a deep cut on his forearm where a claw had sliced through his skin. "The queen has made a mistake," one of the warriors muttered to another, not bothering to lower his voice. "This creature will be dead before we reach the first battle." Marcus heard them but said nothing. He simply stood up again and raised his fists into a fighting stance. The training session lasted for 3 hours, and by the end of it, Marcus could barely walk. He had been knocked down 47 times. His body was covered in bruises and cuts, and he had not landed a single blow on any of his opponents. Drethkal dismissed him with a wave of disgust, and Marcus limped out of the chamber feeling the eyes of every Kethvari warrior burning into his back. He found his way to the medical bay. where a Sirith healer examined his injuries with a scanner that hummed and glowed with soft blue light. 3 cracked ribs, a fractured wrist, severe bruising across 80% of your body. And you have lost a significant amount of blood, the healer reported. Her voice professional but tinged with something that might have been pity. I can accelerate your healing, but you should rest for at least 3 days before attempting further training. How long until the healing treatment is complete? Marcus asked. 6 hours for the bones, 12 for the soft tissue. Then I will return to training in 12 hours. Marcus, said the healer, stared at him with wide purple eyes. Human, did you not hear what I said about rest? I heard you, Marcus replied as he lay back on the medical table and closed his eyes. Wake me when the treatment is finished. He returned to the training chamber exactly 12 hours later. And the Kethvari warriors greeted him with disbelief that quickly turned to mockery. The broken human wants more punishment. Drethkal said with cruel amusement, Very well. Who wishes to teach him another lesson? The beating was just as bad as before, perhaps worse because the warriors had realized that Marcus would keep coming back no matter how badly they hurt him. Some of them seemed offended by his stubbornness, as if his refusal to accept defeat was an insult to their obvious superiority. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus Cole became a regular fixture in the training chamber. He arrived every morning with fresh injuries still healing from the day before, and he left every evening with new ones. The medical staff began keeping a permanent bed ready for him. Queen Valithra observed several of these sessions from a hidden balcony above the training floor, and what she saw troubled her deeply. Her champion was failing. There was no other word for it. He could not match the speed of her warriors, could not withstand their strength, could not penetrate their defenses. By every measurable standard, he was hopelessly outclassed. My queen, Kethril said during one observation session, I must speak plainly. This human will never be ready to face the Void Collective. He lacks the physical capabilities required for combat at the level we need. I am aware of his limitations. Valithra replied without looking at her advisor. Then why do you persist with this choice? There is still time to return to Earth and select a different candidate. Perhaps a younger specimen with more potential for development. Valithra did not answer immediately. Instead, she watched as Marcus was knocked down for the 20th time that morning. The human hit the ground hard, and she saw him struggle to breathe as his damaged ribs protested the impact. And then, as she had seen every day for the past 3 weeks, Marcus Cole pushed himself back to his feet and raised his fists once more. Do you see that? The queen asked softly. I see a fool who does not know when he is beaten. Kethril replied. No, Valithra said. You see something far more dangerous. You see a creature who refuses to accept defeat no matter how many times reality tells him he has lost. She turned to face her advisor, and her amber eyes were bright with an emotion he could not identify. My warriors are bred for victory. They have never known true defeat because they have always been stronger and faster than their enemies. But what happens when they face a foe they cannot overcome? What happens when the Void Harbingers crush their bodies and poison their minds? Kethril did not have an answer. They break, Valithra continued. I have seen it happen. I have watched my finest soldiers collapse into despair when they realize they cannot win. The Void does not kill through strength alone. It kills through hopelessness. She pointed down at Marcus, who had just been knocked down again and was already struggling to rise. That human has been beaten every single day since he arrived on this ship. He has been humiliated and mocked and injured beyond what most Sirith could endure. And not once, not for a single moment, has he considered giving up. There is no hopelessness in him. He simply does not know how to stop fighting. Stubbornness is not power. My queen, perhaps not, Valithra admitted. But I believe it is the foundation of something that is. That evening, the queen visited Marcus in the medical bay. She found him lying on the healing table with his eyes closed, his body wrapped in regeneration bandages that glowed with soft golden light. "You may speak freely," she said to dismiss the healers. And once they were alone, she pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at her with surprise. In 3 weeks. This was the first time she had spoken to him directly since their initial meeting on Earth. "Your Majesty," he said, trying to sit up despite his injuries. "Remain still," she commanded. "I did not come here to receive formalities. I came to ask you a question." Valithra studied his face for a long moment, taking in the bruises and the exhaustion and the pain that he tried to hide. "Why do you keep returning to that chamber? You must know by now that you cannot defeat my warriors through normal means. You are outmatched in every physical attribute. Continuing this training serves no purpose except to cause you suffering." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. "Where I come from, there is an old story about a man who was asked to push a boulder up a hill. Every time he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down, and he would have to start again. He did this for eternity, and he never succeeded in keeping the boulder at the top." "That sounds like a pointless existence," Valithra observed. "Many people think so," Marcus agreed. But the man in the story did not see it that way. He found meaning in the struggle itself, not in the victory. He chose to push the boulder not because he thought he would win, but because the pushing was what made him who he was. "And what does this story have to do with your training?" Marcus smiled slightly, though it clearly pained his split lip to do so. "I am not training to defeat your warriors. I know that is probably impossible. I am training to become something I have never been before. Every time I get knocked down and stand back up, I learn something new about myself. I discover limits I did not know I had, and then I push past them." He turned his head to look directly at her, and in his storm-colored eyes she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. "I do not know what power you saw in me, Your Majesty, and I do not know if I will ever be able to use it. But I do know this. Whatever I am capable of becoming, I will only find it by being pushed beyond what I thought was possible. Your warriors are giving me that gift, even if they do not realize it." Valithra sat in silence for a long time after he finished speaking, and she thought about the sleeping fire she had sensed within him on that first day. Perhaps she had been wrong about this human, but not in the way her advisors believed. Perhaps his true strength was not something that could be measured in speed or power. Perhaps it was something far more fundamental. "You are a strange creature, Marcus Cole," she said finally as she rose to leave. "I have been told that before," he replied. The Void Collective struck without warning on a morning that had begun like any other. Aboard the Throne of Eternity, Marcus was in the training chamber receiving his daily beating from the Kethvari warriors when the alarms began screaming throughout the ship. The harsh wailing sound cut through everything, and even the mighty reptilian soldiers stopped mid-attack to look around with sudden fear in their yellow eyes. "Battle stations!" Drethkold roared. And suddenly, the warriors who had been so eager to humiliate Marcus were running for the doors with panic. Barely hidden beneath their discipline, Marcus followed as quickly as his bruised legs would carry him. And when he reached the observation deck, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. The sky above Velum Prime, the sacred throne world of the Sirith Dominion, was filled with shadow ships. There were hundreds of them, massive vessels that seemed to be made of darkness itself. They moved through space like living things, and where they passed, the stars themselves seemed to dim. How did they get past our defenses? Someone was shouting. How did they get so close without detection? Marcus pushed through the crowd of terrified crew members until he found Queen Valithra standing at the main view screen with her claws digging into the console before her. Her scales had gone pale, and her amber eyes were wide with something he had never seen on her face before. True fear. "The planetary shields," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They are failing." Marcus watched the view screen as lines of red energy lanced down from the shadow ships and struck the glowing barrier that protected the world below. With each impact, the shield flickered and weakened. He did not need to be a military expert to know that it would not hold for long. "My queen, we must retreat," Kethril urged, grabbing her arm with desperate fingers. "If we stay here, we will be destroyed along with the planet." "I will not abandon my people," Valithra snarled, pulling free from his grip. "Vellum Prime is the heart of our civilization. If it falls, everything falls. Then we will die here," the advisor said flatly, "and our empire will die with us." The shields collapsed 40 minutes later, and what followed was the worst massacre Marcus Cole had ever witnessed. He had seen war before. He had fought in conflicts on Earth that had cost thousands of lives. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what the Void Collective brought to Vellum Prime. The shadow ships descended through the atmosphere and released their cargo. Void Harbingers, creatures of living darkness that stood 20 feet tall and moved like nightmares given form. They had no faces that Marcus could see, only swirling voids where eyes should have been. And when they opened their mouths to scream, the sound reached directly into the minds of everyone who heard it. The Kathvari legions fought bravely. Marcus watched from the landing craft as thousands of the reptilian warriors charged into battle against the Harbingers, their plasma weapons blazing and their war cries filling the air. It did not matter. The Harbingers were not truly physical beings. The plasma bolts passed through their shadowy forms and struck nothing. But the claws of the Harbingers were very real, and they tore through Sirith armor like paper through water. Worse than the physical attacks was what the Harbingers did to the minds of their victims. Marcus saw brave soldiers who had never known fear suddenly collapse to the ground, screaming as the shadow creatures approached. The Harbingers fed on despair, and they could reach into a person's mind and pull out every dark thought, every hidden terror, every secret weakness. The warriors who fell to this psychic assault did not die quickly. They lay on the ground weeping and begging as the Harbingers slowly consumed their life force, draining them of everything that made them who they were until only empty husks remained. Queen Valithra led the retreat herself, gathering every survivor she could find and pulling them back toward the ancient temple of the First Flame. The temple was the spiritual heart of the Sirith people, a structure that had stood for 10,000 years through every crisis the Empire had faced. "The temple's sacred barriers may protect us," she shouted as she directed the fleeing crowds. "Move quickly. We do not have much time." Marcus ran with the others, helping to carry wounded soldiers who could not walk on their own. The distance to the temple was less than a mile, but it felt like an eternity with the screams of the dying echoing behind them. They made it through the great stone doors. Just as the Harbingers reached the temple grounds, the ancient barriers flared to life with golden light as the shadow creatures tried to enter. And for a moment, it seemed like they had found safety, but Marcus could see the cracks already forming in those barriers. Thin lines of darkness spreading across the golden surface like veins of poison inside the temple. Queen Valithra took stock of what remained. They had perhaps 200 survivors, most of them wounded soldiers and terrified civilians. The once proud Kathvari legions had been reduced to less than 30 warriors, and many of those were missing limbs or bleeding from wounds that the medical supplies could not fully treat. "We are trapped," Kethril said, stating what everyone already knew. "The barriers will not hold forever, and there is no escape route from this temple." "Then we will make our stand here," Valithra replied. But Marcus could hear the despair creeping into her voice. "We will die as Sirith should die, facing our enemy with honor." Marcus looked around at the huddled survivors and felt something twist in his chest. These people had taken him from his home and dragged him across the galaxy to fight in a war that was not his own. They had mocked him and beaten him and treated him like a curiosity rather than a person, but they had also shown him wonders beyond anything he had imagined. They had fed him and healed his wounds and given him a purpose when he thought his life was reaching its end. And now they were going to die, all of them. And there was nothing anyone could do about it. The Harbingers began their assault on the temple's defenses, and the psychic pressure of their presence filled the air like a physical weight. Marcus felt it pressing against his mind, searching for cracks in his mental armor, trying to find the fears and doubts that it could exploit all around him. Cirith warriors began to fall. The strongest and bravest soldiers of the Dominion dropped to their knees as the Harbingers' influence found their deepest terrors and dragged them to the surface. Some screamed about failures they had never forgotten. Others wept for loved ones they had lost. A few simply went silent, their eyes going blank as their minds retreated from a reality too horrible to face. Even Queen Valithra was affected. Marcus saw her stagger against a pillar, her claws scraping against the stone as she fought to maintain control. Her amber eyes had gone glassy, and her lips were moving silently as she relived some ancient nightmare that the Harbingers had pulled from her. Memories. My queen! Kethril cried out, reaching for her. But then he too collapsed as the psychic assault overwhelmed his defenses. Marcus stood alone in a room full of fallen warriors, and he felt the Harbingers turn their attention toward him. They had saved the human for last. Curious perhaps about this strange creature who had traveled so far from his home world, the pressure increased, and Marcus felt something cold and terrible pushing against his thoughts. It searched through his memories, looking for the fear that would break him. It found plenty of material to work with Marcus, and watched friends die in wars that accomplished nothing. He had held his wife's hand as cancer took her away. He had stood helplessly outside a burning building while his daughter screamed for help inside. He had spent 53 years accumulating regrets and failures and losses that still woke him in the middle of the night. The Harbingers took all of this and threw it at him with the force of a psychic hurricane. They showed him every moment of pain he had ever experienced, every person he had failed to save, every mistake he had ever made, and Marcus Cole, the old broken human who had been beaten down every day since he arrived in this strange galaxy, felt something inside him begin to crack, but it was not his spirit that cracked it. It was the lock that he had placed around something deep within himself many years ago. A power that he had only felt once before when his daughter had been trapped in that fire, and he had somehow found the strength to punch through a brick wall to reach her. The Harbingers felt it too. And for the first time, Marcus sensed something from them that was not hunger or malice. He sensed confusion, and then, very faintly, he sensed fear. Queen Valithra managed to lift her head just enough to see Marcus standing at the entrance of the temple. The human's fists were clenched at his sides, and his entire body was trembling as if he were fighting against something invisible. "Human," she gasped, her voice weak and broken. "Even my strongest warriors have fallen. There is nothing you can do." Marcus turned to look at her, and Valithra felt her breath stop in her throat. His eyes were no longer the color of storm clouds. They were glowing with a light that seemed to come from somewhere impossibly deep. A light that made the shadows around him draw back as if in pain. "Your Majesty," he said. And his voice was different now, carrying harmonics that resonated in her bones. "I think it is time I stopped holding back." He turned away from her and walked toward the temple doors, toward the army of Harbingers that waited outside. And Valithra wanted to scream at him to stop, to tell him. The night sky above Velon Prime was darker than any night had a right to be, filled with the swirling shadows of 100 void Harbingers who had gathered around the temple of the first flame like wolves around wounded prey. Marcus Cole walked out of the temple doors and into that darkness. And for a moment, everything was still. The Harbingers seemed almost curious about this small creature who had chosen to face them alone. Perhaps they had never encountered anything so seemingly fragile that possessed such foolish courage. Marcus could feel them pressing against his mind. Hundreds of dark intelligences trying to break through his defenses and consume the light within him. They whispered terrible things, showed him visions of everyone he had ever loved dying in agony, promised him an eternity of suffering if he did not surrender. But Marcus had spent his entire life facing darkness. He had fought in wars where death was always one mistake away. He had buried his wife and nearly lost his daughter. He had stood at the edge of despair so many times that he knew its landscape better than he knew his own reflection. The darkness held no surprises for him. "You want to see what I am afraid of?" he said quietly, and his voice carried across the temple grounds, despite how softly he spoke. "I will show you something much more interesting." Deep within Marcus Cole, in a place that existed somewhere between his heart and his soul, something ancient began to wake up. It was not a power that he had earned or been given. It was something that had been bred into humanity across millions of years of survival. It was the accumulated will of a species that had faced ice ages and predators and plagues and had simply refused to die. It was the stubborn defiance of creatures who had crawled from the mud and taught themselves to stand upright and reach for the stars. It was the fire of evolution itself, compressed into a single human frame, and when it finally broke free from the cage that Marcus had built around it, the Void Harbingers learned what fear truly meant. Light exploded from within Marcus, like a star being born. It was not fire exactly, though it burned hotter than any flame. It was something more fundamental, a radiance that seemed to exist in opposition to everything the Void Collective represented. The shadows recoiled instantly, screaming in frequencies that could shatter glass and rupture organs. The Harbingers who were closest to Marcus simply dissolved, their dark forms burning away like paper held to a torch. Those further back tried to flee, but they found that they could not move. Pinned in place by a force they had never encountered before, Marcus walked forward. And with each step, the ground beneath his feet glowed with residual light. His human body should have been destroyed by the energy flowing through it, but something was holding him together. Some fundamental stubbornness that refused to let his physical form fail. He reached the first rank of Harbingers and raised one hand. The gesture was almost casual, the kind of movement a person might make when brushing away an insect. But when his hand moved, a wave of brilliance followed it, cutting through the shadow creatures like a blade through smoke. 12 Harbingers died in that single motion, their forms scattering into particles of fading darkness. Marcus kept walking inside the temple. Queen Valithra had dragged herself to one of the windows. She pressed her face against the ancient glass and watched what was happening outside with eyes that could not quite believe what they were seeing. "What is he doing?" Kethril gasped from where he lay on the floor, still too weak from the psychic assault to stand. "I do not know," Valithra whispered. "I have lived for 3 centuries, and I have never seen anything like this." Outside, Marcus had reached the center of the Harbinger army. He was surrounded on all sides by creatures of living darkness, and he should have been torn apart in seconds by their combined power. Instead, he was tearing them apart. The human fought with no technique, no refined martial art. He fought with the raw, primal fury of an apex predator, finally allowed to hunt. His fists connected with impossible force, shattering shadow forms that had withstood plasma weapons without damage. His body moved with a speed that defied the limitations of human physiology, but it was not just physical strength that Marcus wielded. With every blow he struck, waves of that inner light spread outward, burning through the darkness and driving the Harbingers back. The creatures tried to fight. They slashed at him with claws of solidified shadow, tried to overwhelm him with psychic assaults, attempted to drag him down with sheer numbers. But nothing they did seemed to have any effect. When their claws struck his skin, the darkness burned away before it could cut. When they attacked his mind, they found nothing but that terrible fire waiting for them. When they swarmed him from all directions, he simply released more of that light, and dozens of them vanished at once. Marcus did not speak, did not cry out, did not make any sound at all. He moved through the Harbinger army like a force of nature, something inevitable and unstoppable. The Void Collective had consumed civilizations. They had ended species that had ruled star systems for millions of years. They had faced armies of billions and emerged victorious. They considered themselves the ultimate predators, beings of perfect darkness against which no light could prevail. They had never faced a human who had stopped holding back. The battle lasted for almost 20 minutes, though it felt like an eternity to those watching from the temple. By the end, the ground around Marcus was covered in fading shadows, the remains of harbingers that had thought themselves immortal. The few survivors fled. They tore themselves free from whatever force had been holding them in place and scattered into the night sky, racing toward their shadow ships with terror driving them. Faster than thought, Marcus stood alone in the center of a circle of light, his body steaming, his chest heaving as he struggled to breathe. The power was still flowing through him, but it was fading now, retreating back into whatever deep place it had come from. He had won. But he could feel what the victory had cost him. His muscles had torn themselves apart from the strain. His bones had fractured in a dozen places. His heart was beating irregularly, skipping beats that made his vision swim. His nervous system was burning out, the pathways that carried signals from his brain to his body failing one by one. Marcus took one step toward the temple, then another. Each movement was agony, but he refused to fall. He would not let the darkness see him collapse above. The shadow ships began to retreat. One by one, they pulled away from Velum Prime and fled toward the edges of the star system. They did not attack, did not try to continue their assault. They simply ran, and as they fled, they sent a message to every other ship in the Void Collective, a warning that would spread across the galaxy in the hours and days to come. Do not return to this region of space. The humans are awake. They carry fire within them that burns even eternal darkness. Marcus reached the temple steps and looked up at the great stone doors. They seemed impossibly far away, though they were only a few feet above him. Almost there, he said to himself, his voice barely a whisper. He managed 2 more steps before his body finally gave out. The power had burned through everything he had, and there was nothing left to keep him standing. But before he could hit the ground, he felt arms catch him. Strong arms covered in purple and gold scales. Queen Velithra held the human warrior against her chest, supporting his weight with her own body as she guided him down gently to the temple steps. "You did it," she said, and there were tears in her amber eyes. "You stopped them." Marcus tried to respond, but no words came. His vision was going dark at the edges, and he could feel his heart struggling to maintain its rhythm. "Stay with me," Velithra commanded, her voice sharp with fear. "You do not have permission to die, human. Do you understand me? You have not been dismissed." A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. "Not sure my body cares about permissions. Then I will make it care," the queen said fiercely. She turned her head and screamed for her healers, her voice carrying across the temple grounds with all the authority of her 300 years of rule. Medical personnel came running, carrying equipment and supplies that they had salvaged from the retreat. They swarmed around Marcus, scanning his body and shouting readings to each other in urgent voices. "His organs are failing. His nervous system is severely damaged. He has lost massive amounts of blood internally. I do not know how he is still conscious." "Keep him conscious," Velithra ordered. "Do whatever you must, but do not let him go." Marcus felt hands working on him, felt the sting of injections and the warmth of healing devices. But more than any of that, He felt the Queen's hand holding his own, her grip tight and desperate. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice so soft that only he could hear. "Why did you sacrifice yourself for people who treated you so poorly?" Marcus forced his eyes to focus on her face, taking in the scales and the alien features that had seemed so strange when he first met her, but now looked almost familiar. "Because you needed help," he managed to say. "That is what humans do." He wanted to say more, wanted to explain that her people had given him something precious in these final weeks, a purpose, a reason to keep fighting when he had thought his fighting days were over. But the darkness was closing in and he could not find the words. "Sleep now," Lalitha said, and her voice had lost all its royal authority. She sounded like nothing more than someone who was afraid of losing,